All right, welcome back to the VEX studio. My name is Jason McCann. I'm the Director of Global Educational Strategy for VEX Robotics. It's my pleasure to be with Alan West as we continue our discussion about National Engineering Week and really the impact that engineers have had on our society and the world around us. And it's my pleasure to be here with you today, Alan, with your background and everything that you've done. I can't wait to kind of jump into it. But just by way of introduction, right now, Alan, you're a resident entrepreneur at Pittsburgh's Life Science Greenhouse. And what's so interesting about that is one of the unique things about Pittsburgh is the partnerships that we have between our world-class universities and our medical centers, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and so on and so forth. And what you do now is take a lot of that intellectual property and use that to try to develop more life science companies. Did I get that correct?
Yes, you did. Yeah, yeah. It's actually a lot of fun for me. It deals with a lot of different technologies, but I work with a lot of young and older and experienced entrepreneurs and startup companies generally, looking to determine what should be the next step and helping them with their business strategies.
Now, we could probably spend the next hour just talking about your background because you've done so many things in your career. But just to kind of give a brief summary of some of the things that you've done that's kind of led you to the position where you're at now.
Well, my career has taken a very circuitous path. I like to say I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Uh, I earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and started my career at a very large aerospace company, Pratt& Whitney Aircraft. And I decided that I didn't really like that for a lot of reasons, and I wanted to become a teacher. So I moved to Vermont, where I like to ski, and talked my way into teaching eighth grade science. Um, which was a challenge. Uh, yeah, I did that for a few years, and then I decided I really wanted to get back into the life sciences. So I got a degree, a master's degree in design engineering from Tufts, and started working at Johnson and Johnson, designing surgical products. Again, after a few years, I didn't like the large company environment, so I left J&J to a startup company with somebody from J&J who had been my mentor. And then I became marketing director of that company, and eventually was recruited to work at Boston Scientific in the very early days. I was a second employee of one of their divisions, and left there after 10 years as VP of R&D, and then started an endoscopy company, and then I started a surgical oncology company focused on breast cancer. And then I left Massachusetts and moved to Michigan to start a business incubator. And then I got recruited to Pittsburgh with the Life Sciences Greenhouse, and jumped for a while out of the greenhouse into a startup, becoming the founding CEO of a biologics company that spun out of Carnegie Mellon. And then I rejoined the greenhouse in 2016, where I've been ever since.
Tremendous. That's so interesting. And one of the things I wanted to touch upon was your training essentially as an engineer, as you've done all those different things from being research and development, like you were saying with Boston Scientific, entrepreneurial roles that you have now, incubating new companies as they get started, to being an eighth grade middle school science teacher. How do you think your training in engineering and just thinking about, engineers are of course problem solvers. How has that helped you in the different career paths that you've taken?
That's a great question. I think, in thinking about it, I think it's the problem solving skills that you learn as an engineer. And I think that's given me the confidence to do other things, ranging from engineering management to marketing to starting companies. As an example, a lot of people get into marketing through a sales channel. They're great salesmen, and then they get into marketing, product management. And they generally lack the skills to assess or understand technologies. And today, technologies like AI, robotics, and wireless technologies are all being applied to the medical products and particular devices. So having an engineering background enables one to better understand and manage those products. And I additionally have focused my engineering on research and development. And through that experience, because the old story in research and development is if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing your job. because you got to try things. And that really helped develop my risk-taking attitude. I've always been a bit of a risk taker, but that risk taking is an essential quality for starting companies, and I think that was the reason why I started doing some wild and crazy things, I guess, in starting companies that some have succeeded, some have not. So it's just an interesting ride.
It's fascinating about that, and I read in your bio also where you describe failures as learning experiences, and you just talking about that right there. One of the things that we try to do at VEX with the different curriculum that we make to support the implementation of robotics in the classroom is with that engineering design process to try to encourage students to fail fast and to try to learn from that as quickly as possible and to apply that learning to, optimize their robot a little bit more, optimize their code a little bit more, optimize their strategy a little bit more, doing those types of things. But that's something that's difficult as a former classroom teacher, even speaking for myself. That's something that's difficult for a lot of teachers to really accept and to wrap their heads around. And it's also difficult for students to be able to do also. So you mentioned that you were kind of naturally inclined to be a risk taker, but as you've worked with in your role now as you're helping to incubate new companies, you've worked with other entrepreneurs, how have you helped them to try to take on that risk-taking attitude?
Well, if you look at startup companies, in particular in the life sciences, most are going to fail. And it's not because they didn't start with a great idea or somebody with a lot of passion. There's a lot of reasons for those failures, but being part of a startup, even if it does fail, is a huge learning experience. And I always look to hire engineers and people out of other startup companies, even those that had failed, because I knew that they would understand the startup environment. That's why we call them learning experiences. As far as from that definition, I'm very highly educated.
I got a
um,
PhD, right?
yeah, I got a PhD in failure. But I think some people can't make that transition, especially in the startup community, because that risk taking is so important. And we can teach the mechanics of how you start a company, how to be an entrepreneur, but you can't really teach the concept of risk taking easily. You have to experience it. And as I said, getting into research and development was interesting for me because to be successful there, you really do need to try things that are wild and crazy, many of which don't work. And so you get used to failure as sort of just that's the next step in the progress of moving forward and being successful. So I think some people can't make that transition, but I think a lot of people do. And so I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I like to say, in addition to business coaching, I'm doing a lot of psychiatry in terms of what it really takes to be in a startup, because you're always running out of money. You're dealing with a situation, a startup environment where nothing is certain, and you always run into Murphy's law applies to startup companies, since you're always running in situations that are problematic and you need to solve problems. And so you have to have that kind of attitude, or you need to be smart enough to know what you don't know and hire people that surround you that have that attitude. So there's a number of ways of approaching that. But I think rather than looking at failures, you just look at it as steps in the design process, steps in moving forward. And if you truly believe in the project, in the product that you're trying to develop, making a few hiccups and actually retransitioning some ideas or changing the way you're going is part of the process. And so, I see it as just part of the evolution of a product.
What's so interesting about that, just to touch upon that a little bit more, one thing that we try to do, even with our curriculum, it's a fine balance in between. You have to obviously, especially in your situation, have a lot of pride in your work. You have to take a lot of pride. You're working a lot of hours in a startup. You have to be very passionate about it, and you have to be very prideful. But that can't get in the way of recognizing that it's time to pivot. This is no longer a
Yeah.
good idea. We now have to go in this direction. So you have to have that attitude and that ability to be able to recognize and say, even though I put a lot of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into this, it's essentially time to let go and to go do this something else. And that's something, if a sixth grader has spent a couple weeks building a drivetrain for their robot, has to eventually
Mhm.
realize, you know what, this isn't the best drivetrain. I have to now pivot to something else. That's something that we're, to your point about experiencing that, that's something that we're trying to do with young students. So by the time they do get to you, so to speak, they have that embedded experience inside them. But it is a fine balance to go between those two things.
Yeah, no question at all. But I've met people who can't move beyond that, and they're still trying to give CPR to an old idea that's actually. And markets change, markets shift, technologies change. So you might be working on a great technology, a great product, but by the time you get, especially in life sciences, where you have to deal with FDA, by the time you get through all the FDA testing and get the clearance from FDA to sell your product, it may be obsolete. So, and I've seen that numerous times because technology has been moving so quickly. And so you need to recognize that. And you need to actually, it's an old adage, I think, and it was attributed to Wayne Gretzky that, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going to be. In a startup, you really need to, if you're developing a product, for example, you try to look forward so that in 3 or 5 years, if it takes you that long to get the product launched, where is the landscape going to be? What's the technology as well as the marketing landscape? So that when it does get launched, it's still a very viable product. And but that's a trick. It's something you have to be thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. Now, um, you kind of when you touched upon your bio, the one thing that you didn't mention was the fact that you've published, I believe, two books on the Civil War, some
Yeah.
of the medical devices that were used in Civil War times. You're also an accomplished photographer. You mentioned skiing earlier on, so you do have a lot of diverse interest, and I think again, as a former teacher, unfortunately, one of the things I used to see in education all the time was students thinking that they had to pick one career path and then kind of stay on that path, whereas you'd kind of described yours as being, circular, serpentine earlier, going to all these different things. So, if you want to touch upon that a little bit, just the fact that you can have diverse interests. I can enjoy engineering and also enjoy writing. I can enjoy engineering and also enjoy art and painting and those types of things. Oftentimes we see this divide between the sciences and the humanities, and I love talking to people like yourself that have kind of knocked that wall down, so to speak. So if you want to just spend a little bit of time talking about that, that would be great.
Yeah, well, you raise a good point because when I was leaving high school and looking at colleges and universities, and I always wanted to be an engineer because the idea I loved science and technology, and I thought that applying science and technology to product development would be really kind of fun. And but I was concerned about going to a school. One of my schools was Rensselaer Polytechnic, and I felt if I went to a technology school and I didn't like it, what would I do? So I went to a university that had liberal arts as well. Didn't really go that way because I really did enjoy the engineering. But I became a science teacher when I discovered I didn't like working in a large company. Although that seemed like a career diversion, I've been able to leverage all those experiences, even the photography and the history. Um, if you think about it, to be an effective teacher, you need to be an entertainer and convince your students that what you're teaching them is useful and exciting. Same thing if you're running a company. Same thing if you're trying to raise money from investors. And so I actually developed the theory that people don't progress mentally beyond eighth grade. I mean, if you look at Congress, they're all a bunch of old eighth graders. And in dealing with them or investors or whatever, I use the eighth grade teaching techniques of being entertaining, injecting humor, making eye contact, using lots of images, and starting in by telling them why they should be interested. So I think I've been able to leverage all of those experiences. The writing, I always enjoyed writing. I always felt that a lot of engineers don't do well at writing, and so I've worked on that. And when I worked at Johnson and Johnson, they used with the company I was working at was around during the Civil War, and they had in the lobby a Civil War surgeon's kit that they sold in the 1860s. And I was fascinated because all those products sold during the Civil War, they still sell, but they're now stainless steel so they don't rust, and they're not using wooden handles. So I just got fascinated by 19th century medicine, and that was something that I just continued with my interests, and I started collecting too many things, and so I think it's important, and I always look for this when I'm trying to hire a good engineer or anybody that's going to be joining a startup. So you have to have a lot of interest. Hobbies, whether it be stamp collecting or track and field running or running marathons, whatever you're doing, um, define who you are. And I think an engineering degree actually is very augments that experience, because what you learn in terms of thought process and how to analyze a problem, how to solve a problem, product development, all of those things can be applied whether you're writing a book on in this case it was Civil War history, or whether you're doing some artwork or photography. I mean, it's all very similar. So it's I found I was able, even though you could say that a lot of the things I did were diversions from my career path, but they're actually all things that I can leverage because they define who I am today. And I think it's made me a better entrepreneur, and it's made me a better person all around.
That's fascinating. It's also inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. I think those are a lot of great lessons that we can both take back to our classrooms, and also students can really take to heart about having those experiences, and having those experiences essentially become building blocks for you as you mature and go on your career path and leverage all those things like Alan talked about. So again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and thank you for joining us here again in the VEX studio. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.